Hello and welcome to 4000 and Counting. I'm Watty, and today I am joined once again by Dr. Victoria Silverwood. But before I bring Dr. Victoria on to speak to you folks, you may have seen on our social media or perhaps on the Slough Jets social media, we've had some very, very tragic news in the ice hockey world in the last couple of days here. Harry Hatfield's 3-year-old son, Tyler, has sadly passed away. Our thoughts are with Harry, Michaela, and anybody that has been affected by this tragedy. If you need to, our DMs are open, but please respect Harry's privacy at this very difficult time. But just want to let Harry know that we're thinking of him. Victoria, sorry, not an easy one to come in on the back of, but I just wanted to get that out the way nice and early. Welcome back to 4000 and Counting, my friend. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me back.
Well, the reason we're getting you back is very specific. I'm sure we will wander all over the place as we normally do with our conversation. But the news this week has just dropped, I think maybe on the 10th, a couple of days back, that Matt Petgrave has once again been rebailed. Obviously, in any of the press statements and stuff like that, nobody's been named, but it's very widely assumed that it's Matt. And anybody that's in our world will know that sadly it was Matt that was involved. But the conversation has led to why has he been rebailed? Why is it gone on over a year? How what's your interpretation of the fact that they keep rebailing Matt and not coming out with any answers, whether it be magistrates or no further action?
I completely understand why everybody is confused and frustrated and wanting answers on this. But hopefully I can shed some light on the system and how it works, and then people will kind of understand why it happens the way it does. And that even starts with the naming of the player, because initially when the incident happened, the name of the player was released, but as soon as the player was arrested, they were given extra rights, including the right to privacy on that. So, legally the player isn't named until such a point as they are charged. And then they lose that option and the player would be named. But, it's no secret that we know the player that is involved, but for legal reasons. Once a player is arrested, or any human being is arrested, then the good thing for them is that they suddenly get a load more rights. So although it's, they're going to be questioned, they're going to face restrictions, they would be questioned anyway. And I understand that before the arrest happened, that the player was cooperating fully with the police and speaking to them anyway. But it's actually in their interests to be arrested on this, because it allows them to have free legal advice, and it allows them to have a certain number of other rights, and for their all the steps for them to be taken into consideration. So it's not a case of them just assuming that they're going to charge him by arresting him. It's a case of them needing more information and allowing that. The frustrating process has been how long it's taken. And I know a lot of people don't understand, and why would you understand how it works? But there are various processes for different times. So once a player is arrested, for example, they have 24 hours about whether to charge them or bail them. Most of you will have seen sort of 24 hours in police custody or whatever, so no, there's a clock there. But at each other stage, there's also a clock with different timings. So there are legislations according to how long somebody can be bailed for and how regular the meetings must happen, that they are returned to bail and are rebailed. The usual incidences are up to 12 months. So a lot of us were expecting there to be a decision on Monday, which would have been just under 12 months, but that was his return date, about whether to charge the player or not. Because once you get to the 12 months part, the decision about whether to allow bail to be continued goes to a magistrate. So at earlier stages, it's with the police, then with higher police officers as you go up, and then from 12 months plus, it's unusual to remain on bail, but not unheard of. But all those
So with the
decisions
Crown
have to
Prosecution Service, will it be the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, that will now make that decision on whether to rebail him after 12 months?
No, the decision will be made by a magistrate.
So it will go to court.
Yeah, so it goes to a magistrate, but it doesn't go to an open court. magistrate makes a decision about whether, by listening to the CPS, by also taking into account the victim, and in this case, a victim's family, as well as the accused, that takes all those into account and decides whether it's fair in any rounds to allow them to go on bail for longer. So a magistrate has to agree in any case past 12 months.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. I knew like prior to that the Crown prosecution had kind of had their say. With the fact that it's gone on to a magistrate and the magistrate has then again granted further bail conditions, like further bail. I don't know if there's any conditions other than probably don't leave the country. Maybe perhaps there might be conditions where he doesn't get to speak to witnesses or victim's family or any of those other kind of conditions that they put in. If the fact that they are rebailing him, does that lead you to believe that they perhaps are going to look to push this towards a court case in the future?
It's difficult because the assumption would be the longer he's on bail, the more that they're seeking to push something. But it could also be a case of that he's still on bail because they can't decide to charge him yet. So it doesn't, the length of time doesn't necessarily mean that it's more likely there will be a charge. It's just the process. The police and the CPS will have to prove that they've elicited a lot of expert responses. They've interviewed people involved in the case. They've sought legal and professional sort of expert advice on this in order to be able to make a claim for the bail to be continued. They'd also have to say that they believed, and this is where this circumstance might be difficult because the player is not doesn't hold a UK passport. They also have to say that they, want to be sure that that person remains in that location.
That they're not a flight risk.
Yeah.
And by the nature of him being North American and being Canadian and family being there, ultimately, if there was no bail conditions, I imagine Matt would go home to his family, which I wasn't sure on the legalities of it, but we chatted a little bit off there. Everyone kind of on our pages and other, internet sources kind of just assumed that Matt wasn't allowed home due to the ongoing case. But you said there is certain circumstances where they could carry on the investigation but actually allow him to go home.
Yeah.
What would be the reason on them not allowing him to go? Because as you said, he's communicated so far. I imagine he's turned up to the police station for every rebailing. Like he's been cooperative. I get that going to another country does obviously put a barrier in place, but if he's shown to be cooperative and he's shown to toe the party line and do as he's supposed to, are you surprised they haven't allowed him to go home? Because in my personal opinion, I don't think Matt intended to do it. So with that in mind, that guy's had a fucking tough year.
Mm.
And I imagine he probably just wants to see his fucking mum and dad. Like, he's still just a guy at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
And he probably just wants to see his friends, see his buddies, have a beer, get a hug, He's not been allowed to do that. If we're led to believe what's correct, that he's also got a couple of conditions that kind of involve him being away from the team. He's kind of isolated on his own in a different country. Sorry, I'm just rambling really, but
No.
I'm sure there's a question in there somewhere. But
Well, no, I mean, we totally understand that it's that it's really, really tricky. I mean, my background is criminal defence before I became a criminologist and started specialising in sport related issues. I was in criminal defence, so my kind of first sort of thing is always to think about the person who's been arrested or the person who's under suspicion. And absolutely, it's a horrifically brutal experience for anybody to be accused of something like this, and the length of time it's taking and the lack of choice of support, I'm going to say, rather than lack of support, because we don't know what support this player is achieving. But if they're not allowed to choose where that support is, then obviously that's an issue, and it is utterly brutal. But they can't just keep choosing to extend it like on a whim. This is if they've extended the bail, then there's evidence on their side that they cannot charge him yet. What they could have done was release him under investigation, but without bail. which would mean they'd say to him, look, we're still going to investigate this and we might want to speak to you in the future, but you're not on bail. And I did wonder whether at the 12-point mark, when it went to a magistrate, whether that would be the decision. But the decision's obviously come back that they believe that he should be bailed, and sort of continue to be formally investigated with a requirement to attend every couple of months.
You touched on there about them getting expert opinions, expert kind of views on the case. Who are the experts on this case? Because to me, they're not your usual experts that would be on Joe Blogg's murdered the guy down the pub, or, domestic dispute goes wrong where CID and the detectives come in and they've dealt with 1,000 of these. This has never happened. There is no precedent. So my question is, who are the experts? Because realistically, in the criminal prosecution world, I don't imagine there's going to be too many experts that know about the game and about the gameplay, and whether it was aggressive, whether it was not, whether it was controlled, whether it was not. So my idea of the experts in this would be someone like yourself, or perhaps coaches or GMs. But I wonder where like the police go and the Crown Prosecution Service, where do they go to get their experts on this case?
You never know on an individual basis where they've gone. I would expect that with a background in criminal law and 16 years researching the culture of violence in hockey, that I might be one of the people that would have been approached, but I have not been approached.
That's wild to me.
To be involved in this, which is, I'm not suggesting I would have the answers if I was approached, but I do think I'd have a unique insight given that I understand the game as well as understanding the law and understanding crime. But there are plenty of people who they'll be speaking to. I imagine sort of sports lawyers. I imagine workplace injury specialists. Obviously, it doesn't count exactly as a workplace injury because it's sport, which is obviously problematic because they don't know then who they should go to. But there's a whole load of people they could be speaking to. I'm not sure exactly who it is, and we won't discover who it is until we see anything relating to a charge or anything relating to a case.
Obviously, the next step would be either they might rebail him again, but then the other options are the ones that we've touched base on. So NFA, for those that don't know, is just no further action, goes on about his life and everything's a-okay. The other option is they charge him and he'll then go to magistrates, and if I'm Matt, I plead not guilty at Madge, which means it's then going to go to Crown Court, which is then going to be a trial by jury, and you're going to have expert witnesses, you're going to have witnesses that were there on the day, you're probably going to have medical staff, you're going to have teammates, you're going to have all sorts of people getting involved. Do you think it comes to the Crown and goes that far? Because it's going to be such a hard thing to prove, and such a hard thing to prove to 12 jurors that have no idea about ice hockey, that this guy went out and intentionally cut somebody else's throat with a skate, because it's so far-fetched. I can't ever see you being able to convince 12 people from anywhere on the planet that he intentionally did this and then be unanimous with it.
Yeah. And I think the difficulty, I mean, they could do something else. They could choose to release him under investigation. So it's not just a case of release him, no further action, or charge him. But they've obviously made their decision on what they're doing. The issue would be, and this is what we see in fraud cases all the time, is the jury is not going to have the understanding of the sport. Do you remember we spoke a couple of years ago about the then EIHA using a barrister to review the Oxford Stars case, and clearly he'd never watched hockey at all, didn't understand that there was fighting involved, couldn't believe violence. And you see a violent incident and you're making your assumption of, well, that's terrible. But if you don't understand the sport and the history of contact in that sport and the history of sort of conflict resolution that there's been, and by them sort of tacitly allowing fighting, then how are you going to understand an incident as severe as this? So they're going to have to do an awful lot of work in explaining to the jury exactly what hockey is and exactly what has historically been accepted in hockey. And I think that would be really problematic.
Just while we're here, ladies and gents, I'm just going to give a quick shout out and a quick plug to Erin at Adams Angels. 6 of the catastrophic bleed kits have already been used. Now, that is 6 incidents in less than 6 months. These incidents do happen. You guys can go a long way to helping out. There's a crowdfunding, so a Just Giving page. You'll be able to find it on 4,000 Counting. You'll be able to find it on Aaron's Angels. They are still collecting money. They're still getting these kits out to teams up and down the country. As I understand, they've done an exceptional job. One thing I will say, take the fucking kits on the bench. Don't leave them in the locker room. Don't leave them in Sue's car. Don't leave them in the bar. If you've got these kits and your club has these kits, please, please, please have them on the bench, whether it's training night, game night, conference night, England night, GB night. It doesn't matter what level, recce, women's, wherever. Have these kits on the bench. They will save lives. And ultimately, 6 have been used already. That is both fantastic and worrying. It's worrying that we've had this many incidents, but it's fantastic that those kits have been on hand and we've stopped anything more severe. So yeah, please go check out Erin's page, Adams Angels. They do great things. Did you hear that some people wrote to the EIH complaining about the kits?
I didn't hear that. It probably doesn't surprise me a whole lot, but I was thinking, one of the only good things to come out of all this is the fact that there are so many people trying so hard to make positive changes and to protect players' safety, all off their own back and all in their own time and their own finances. And, the only positive thing, that there was an article in The Athletic last week on the year anniversary of Adam's death. And it was opportunity for people to kind of acknowledge all the good things that have happened and the fact that the hockey community hasn't fallen apart. And that they're sort of united in wanting to protect players and their safety. And so the work Erin's doing is unbelievably good and important, and we should be supporting that as people who watch the sport and play the sport or have family and friends who do.
Big up, Erin, you beast. She's a badass. We love Erin here. She's always there to help us out on 4,000 and counting events and stuff like that. One of the good girls involved in this sport. You touched on player safety, so let's go to net guards. It's something we discussed a little bit off air. I wasn't actually planning on particularly talking about that today, but it's kind of gonna go full circle anyway. So net guards, it sounds like the Elite League have kind of followed suit. The NIHL, they introduced net guards on the back of Shane Moore and a couple of others going pretty hot and heavy early on last year, or last season, so to speak. We saw the AHL, we've saw teams in Germany and the KHL. We've seen teams everywhere start wearing the net guards. Elite League seem to have followed suit. Something you said to me off air is it's interesting how they're going to police this, because I was at an Elite League game at the weekend and there wasn't 40 guys wearing net guards. Or if they were, they're fucking good at hiding them. Like, they're really good at hiding them. So let's break it down. First of all, are you glad they brung the rule in as a start? And B, how do we police it to make sure that they are being worn? Because as an ex-player, and I said to you before we came on, my net guard used to hide when I was a junior. Yeah, I'd have it on. Only if the ref came, it would be like one of these. I'd go, oh, there it is, straight back down. Players will try. We always do it with our visors. If your visor's supposed to be here and we creep it up there, how do we police it? So that's the 2 questions I have for you.
Yeah, so I was at a game with one of the teams that you saw this weekend and one that you didn't, and noticed that a lot of the players weren't wearing their net guards properly. They all were wearing net guards, but sometimes they were hidden, sometimes they were tucked away. Sometimes you could see the player's chain higher than the net guard, which obviously means it's not really doing its job for what it's supposed to do. And I put a little poll out on Twitter because, I'm a fan as much as anyone else. I've got a season ticket to a hockey team. I watch hockey every single weekend and I work in hockey. So I was thinking, I understand the players don't necessarily want to wear them, but to me, it's like seatbelts. They're like, if you're not wearing a seatbelt, the police are going to pull you over and will tell you to wear your seatbelt. No one necessarily wants to be uncomfortable, but you just get used to it. And my kind of stance is on that. The reason why net guards have had, I thought it would take seasons for this to actually impact people wearing net guards, but it's happened really fast. And part of that is because the coroner actually made it a recommendation
Yeah.
when she temporarily adjourned the case for the police investigation to sort of finish. If you then don't respond and you don't start wearing net guards after a coroner has suggested that it's an important thing to do, then you run the risk of litigation because people are going to be wondering why you don't. So you kind of have to make the rule.
That's a big boy PP whack after the if you go against the coroner, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's just saying, well, okay, I don't really care about the safety, which is leaving you open to litigation. I thought it took the Elite League a little bit too long to police it, but I was pleased that from the first official season game, not the regular season, players were wearing net guards. And part of me thinks, well, it's up to them. They're all adults. They're deciding how restrictive they want it to be and what level they want to wear it. If they're wearing one, they're wearing one. A bit like chin straps not being tight enough and helmets falling
the
off.
two finger rule and a chin strap.
Yeah, which nobody.
Yeah, you could have got a fist in my chin strap. It was down here somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody polices that. So part of me was thinking, well, do you know what? These are adults. It's up to them to decide how they want to wear it. But at the same time, if the league has that rule and the league is appointing officials to work with the rules, then potentially the league is leaving itself open to legislation if officials aren't policing it. So that was my kind of concern. I put a little poll out on Twitter, not an academic survey, not like my Spectator one or anything. Just I was interested to what people thought. 70% of the respondents said that they thought the officials should enforce it. 30% said they thought the players should decide. I imagine among players, there's many more players who think they should decide rather than it being enforced. But I imagine amongst officials, would be sort of similar. But
because the officials are wearing them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're wearing them. And they're also wearing the dusters this month. So if you can go check out the Elite League officials Movember. Shout out you guys and girls. Hopefully not girls. Shout out you guys that are doing it. We love when we see, especially like the league getting behind it. It's on the jerseys. That's great. It's a great initiative. But yeah, the officials are wearing net guards. It would be great to see everybody wearing them, and I was going to say set an example, but it's not really their responsibility to set an example, even though it will. But it's good to see them. They're wearing them properly. The kids will pick up on it ultimately.
Yeah.
And within 2 or 3 years, if you start playing hockey, you'll never not wear a net guard. You'll never know that people didn't wear a net guard. It'll be alien to you, the thought of not wearing one. And that's just where we need it to be. You look at the fact that there have been 6 other incidents, obviously, just the ones that we know about in the UK. The potential for this to happen again, it is there.
Yeah.
And I think this has really opened our eyes to it, because outside of Clint playing for Buffalo way back in the 80s, 90s, we've never really seen such a severe one. There's been a couple, and there's been guys that get hit by puck. It happened in the NHL the other night. One of the boys got hit in the neck with a puck, goes back to he played a hell of a shift after it. I don't know how. He played like an amazing forecheck, back check, did everything, but then got on the bench, and the paramedics and the team doctors had him lying down. So like there is potential for injuries to happen all the time. If we've got protection, i.e. net guards, it might just save someone's life.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. It's a contact sport. And as with all other contact sports that we have, you kind of consent to a certain level of violent or risk or danger when you play it, but you know what that level is going to be. So if you can put these things in place, and like, I'm not suggesting that every player plays with a cage and there's full body Teflon or anything like that, but if there's a recommendation that we need to consider the use of net guards, then try it, but also police it and make sure that players are protected. Because if we can prevent that, if we could have prevented that one thing from happening, that would have been enough.
Yeah.
Yeah,
just one would be enough. Adam's family would probably certainly agree everything that you just said there, because if a net guard could have protected Adam, he would still be here. I think that was probably part of the Elite League's decision to delay because they're waiting to kind of see how the situation played out after Adam. Adam wasn't required to wear a net guard at the point of his death, and obviously like legal stuff, whether it be civilly or through the law, is ongoing. And I wonder if, like you talked about, litigation and stuff like that was the reason for the delay in the Elite League, going live with it.
Yeah, I mean, the danger is if you immediately admit the players should have been wearing net guards and that we knew that, which we didn't. We didn't have precedent for this. We didn't know what was going to happen. But if you suddenly respond, there could be the assumption that you knew it was dangerous and we should have had them all along, which, we didn't. We have it for juniors. People under the age of 18 have to wear that with a full face cage. But as adults, we've never had the requirement for them. Now that we have, it would be very hard for us not to have that in the future.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
With the news that obviously Matt's been rebailed, will there be a stage where it gets to where they have to make a decision? They can't just keep rebailing. Is there like an end date on the time scale, or is it just as and when it happens?
Sadly, no end date. However, that's not as sort of frightening as it sounds to think that this could go on for 5 years or whatever. It's very unusual, and each time he is bailed, so for example he's been bailed now to the 20th of January, a magistrate will have to confirm that they've done what they can in that meantime. They haven't delayed things. They've got questions answered that they had. They're in a position to try and make a charge. They can't just keep saying, well, yeah, that's fine, I trust you to be speaking to the right people. A magistrate will be making sure that there is enough balance in the public interest to keep the person on bail.
We've heard a couple of things kind of come through to us over the time since it's happened. And one of the things that was mentioned to me was the fact that there was no ambulance on site at the arena, which 9,000 people plus the players. It seems kind of crazy to me to have a venue that size and there was no ambulance on site. I believe now it's been made mandatory to have ambulances on sites at games. Would there be any like the sort of like legal ramifications for like the arena in terms of that? And are you happy to see like ambulances have to be on site for Elite League games now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the original legislation was regarding ambulance
Not
sort
sure.
of attendance, whether it was done on numbers or anything, but certainly in majority of rinks that I've seen, certainly the smaller rinks, there was no requirement for that. Now the Elite League, and I don't believe this was enforced, I believe this is something, a decision that they took as a league to have an ambulance in attendance at all games. I think part of me wondered whether that was actually just to make people feel more relaxed about attending, feel
Yeah.
better knowing the players are protected. The players also, know that there's that level of skill involved, that's sort of on call for them. It can't be a cheap process, but I'm glad to see that the league have prioritised it because, there are many other things that aren't involved in the violence of the game that can happen at a hockey game that would benefit from the fact that the ambulances are in attendance. I think that's a really positive step.
Even putting the players aside, you put that many fans through, I think last week, 45,000 fans through the door at Elite League fixtures. One of them has a heart attack, one of them falls down and breaks a leg. Someone has a fit, whatever it may be, whatever the scenario is, it doesn't necessarily have to be the players, but when you have that many people gathering for that length of time, there's always going to be. I think I was reading on the Sheffield forum that a fan had fell down the stairs last week. Now, anyone that's been to an ice rink knows those stairs are like they're literally concrete.
Yeah,
If you fall down there and land badly, you could find yourself in real bad trouble. So having an ambulance on site is not only beneficial for the players, it's beneficial for the fans as well.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And just the confidence, because I can't imagine. I mean, I've been told by many players how they feel, but I also, struggle to imagine how hard it must be to for them all this uncertainty going on, because they're constantly second guessing themselves about whether something will be called, or whether they'll be held responsible for something, whether their penalty league minutes will make people assume things. I think there's still a lot of insecurity amongst the players, and they are, understandably going to be concerned every time, this is rebailed until there is an outcome from this. So I understand their kind of stresses with that, because it's a difficult thing. If the player is charged, and if it goes to court, then this will have a massive impact, not just on hockey but on all contact sports. The precedent that this could make as a legal case would be the biggest thing to happen in all contact sports for many years. And I think the part of that is a delay as well. I think people are aware that this would mean a massive change to the current situation we have about consent to violence in sport, and it would mean that there are massive wide-scale changes to any contact sport that we have. So we need to make sure we're not just charging and pursuing a case without being fully aware of what the implications might be.
So the kind of other sports that could be affected then, when you think about it, let's go lacrosse, or box lacrosse is essentially ice hockey on trainers. Like in terms of like the impact, obviously no blades, but sticks, full contact, hitting, fighting. Lacrosse is kind of the same. Then you've got rugby, which is just animals, collision sport. It's not contact sport, it's collision. Those guys kill each other.
Yeah.
NFL, although padded, the speed some of these guys move out and the contacts that they make, there's a lot of sports. I mean, how would it work in terms of legislation being brung in? Would they then target those sports as well?
Well, once a precedent is passed, then that would be all sports. It would be passed in all sports. It wouldn't be a precedent just for hockey.
Yeah.
It would say that you can pursue criminal cases against somebody. And, there have been cases before where criminal charges have been brought against players for things, but the courts have never ruled on those. They've always ended up sort of finally being settled against it. Well, not even settled out of court, because it's a criminal matter, so you can't really settle that out of court. Civil cases have been settled out of court, but the criminal cases, the courts just don't want to get involved because they know the impact of this will be massive. So I can understand why it's a difficult decision about whether to charge him and why it's taken time. But they are the only good thing for the fans and players to remember is that there is due diligence. They're not just doing it because they haven't done any work in this area. They're not just sort of saying, how long can we keep him? They have to prove that it's in the public interest, and it's in the player's interest, and it's in the victim's family's interest at each stage. So I hope that it won't go on and on and on, but it can.
So do you think there'll be big time eyes from like serious players in other sports then, or like looking to see what's going to happen here? So if you're rugby union, rugby league, or whoever it may be, do you think you're watching this case with keen interest?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one question, and I go over to the US and Canada quite a bit for work, and the first question anybody asks me, not just in hockey but also in other sports, is, what happened with that guy? What's going to happen next? What do you think will happen with this? And it's fascinating how it is a global thing. It isn't just because the player is from the US. It's the fact that people all over the world know about this case and are interested in it. The lack of understanding on the legal process has been a problem. And like you talked before about all the people that comment and, mention things to you and onto the 4,000 and counting page, most of the misinformation from there is people who aren't involved in hockey. Most of the people complaining about it, having an opinion, isn't based on something completely different. You wouldn't believe well, you probably would because you would have had the same ones, but the amount of messages you get from people, making it a race issue, making an AI art of it and deciding to send it to you. Like, it's just...
Yeah, people are weird, man.
The people that are doing that are not hockey people.
No.
They're people with an agenda that's outside of hockey. And it is frustrating for hockey people to think, why is this going on? This is cruel. But they do have to, and you have to kind of put your faith a bit in the criminal justice system here and in the magistrates who aren't who are volunteers, who sort of
Yeah.
offer their time to make sure that they're considering both the player that's accused and the victim's family. Is not really the job of the police or the league or anyone else to tell us what's going on at different stages. We just have to know that there is a system in place to protect people who are accused of things. So,
I
my
mean,
background's criminal law, and there's a lot of things that are put in place to protect people when they are arrested and potentially when they're charged, to make sure that their rights are carried out.
so if Matt was to get a no further action, how do you think that kind of looks to the wider public and to the other sports? Because in my opinion, like I've said it before, I've said it for the last year. I don't think there's a fucking single possibility's chance that Matt intentionally did that. Like, just it doesn't even enter my brain waves that he intended to do that. But ultimately, a death has happened. If he
Yeah.
was to then get an NFA legally, what does that mean in terms of other sports, and how does hockey move on? And
Legally, it will revert to exactly how it has been for decades or longer, where we wait for the next test case. We wait for the case that does go through, that then makes a decision and then makes rulings. Um, and that's the same with all kind of risk activity, even non-sport risk activity. You're waiting for the next case to make precedent. What will also happen, I imagine, is there may be civil claims made by the victim's family. So we saw in the O.J. Simpson case, completely different case, nothing to do with it, but just as an example, he actually went through the legal system, was found not guilty of the criminal offence, but was later found guilty in the civil courts um, for his offence. So he was civilly responsible, but not criminally. So it could be that if a criminal charge isn't pursued and he is released, no further action, that there will be civil cases that come out of this, or it could be that nothing comes out of this, and we know that they did their investigations and they took their time, and we trust that that is sufficient.
would a civil case come against Matt directly, or would it come against the Sheffield Steelers or the Elite League, or a kind of combination between all three, or would even the Panthers be in on the mix for civil action because Adam was playing for them? I'm not sure how that would work.
I'm not a civil specialist, so I wouldn't know exactly, but the potential would be there for a civil suit to be brought against individual teams, individual players, leagues, and even governing bodies. So it could go
Okay.
from the IIHF all the way down to individual players. But it may not, and it may not happen at all. I think that's entirely down to what the victim's family decide, what they feel, whether justice has been served, or whether they feel like there is a claim for more and they want to push for more change. And
Yeah,
even without a criminal charge, a civil charge could lead to changes being made, because insurers would make sure that the leagues put safety things in place.
yeah. I have a couple of friends who are in the law game, and that's what they've kind of said to me, that it would be a very different landscape. Will Even if, like you say, he ends up getting charged civilly, the whole landscape of everything changes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the things that, when the EIHL did make the decision to have an ambulance there, and when they did make the decision to mandate neck guards, part of that was to protect against future suits as well. To
Yeah,
acknowledge, well, we're aware that there's this horrible thing that happened and we need to do what we can to stop it. So we will put those things in place. And it might be that that's enough, the fact that they've made those changes, or it might be that they want to push for more. And I think as a victim's family, they've got every right to decide
yeah,
exactly what they
100%.
want to pursue.
I mean, it's got to have been tough for them for the last year,
Yeah.
and you could see why they would be happy to just let it go by and do nothing, just grieve and move on with their life. But you could also see the other side, where they do feel that they need more justice, and they could, in turn, go down the civil route. It just depends on how they feel individually, and they lost their son, they've lost their brother, they've lost their fiance, husband, however it was. They're still going to be very raw. It's only been a year, so
Mhm.
It's a really, really sad, tough situation for everybody concerned. I just hope that they're at a bit more peace than they probably were this time last year.
Mm.
Because
You
yeah,
know, and
it's
I'm sure that until there are levels of closure had in different, legal situations, that it will be up in air. But I also hope that they can also see the support that is around for them, because
Mhm.
there's universal support in the whole of the hockey world for all of Adam's family and friends, and players he played with. And every time he's rebailed, every time this comes up again in the news, it must be really, really brutal for them. But there is the support there, certainly from hockey fans.
Well, I saw Kyle Osterberg for the Belfast Giants. He's wearing Adams number 47 in warm up. I noticed that when I was up there in Fife, we put a picture out. So that there's still a lot of outpouring of support for Adam in the UK. We've seen it at games. Well, we saw it at games up and down the country just a couple of weeks, or not even a couple of weeks ago, just last weekend, I think it was.
Yeah,
And some amazing banners, some murals, and the fans are really still going all out. It goes to show how much this whole incident has really changed people's lives. I know just from doing this podcast, the amount of people that were at the game, whether they be Steelers, well, we've had Steelers fans, Panthers fans, obviously players from a couple of different from both sides as well. But we also had like arena staff and stuff message us over the last year and reach out, and it's going to be tough for everybody. Like it took a
yeah,
lot of people a long time to get back in the rink after the incident. We've had people that have reached out that have been suffering with PTSD from the incident. It truly was a freak incident, and it's been something that's kind of divided opinions, but at the time it brought the hockey community right together, which, I like to think the hockey community in the UK, when really push comes to shove, they're a pretty good bunch. Maybe if you stay off Twitter. If you can stay off Twitter, you might think the hockey lot are a good bunch. How does UK hockey move forward in a positive light from this? Obviously, we've got Erin's Angels, and we've got ambulances. We've got a couple of things that have already changed. What else could we do to ensure player safety, but ensure like positive things come from this in the end?
yeah. I mean, I think the league is doing really well in terms of making those changes before they were required. In terms of like being proactive, I think there absolutely should be conversations between players and leagues and experts about this, about what could be put into place. I think the fact that we have Adam's jersey being retired, the fact that we're going to sort of hopefully continue to have this day of remembrance every year, where we remember what happened. And the main thing that I hope that comes from it for players is a knowledge of what is and what isn't acceptable, a knowledge that even when things happen, that they have support of their teams, and that there's an awareness that talking about mental health for players is really, really important, and that isn't seen as something that's soft. That's seen as something that's absolutely integral to their role.
Well, just another little plug. There was full of them this episode today, but recent podcast guest. Actually, I think he was my last guest on before yourself, Mr. Nick Rothwell. We have, if you are a current player, you are an ex-player. Obviously, there's no players' association anymore, but we want there to be a place where guys can come together, girls as well, that have played. The only stipulation is that you must have played. You can't be a fan and join the group, I'm afraid. But it's the Stick Together Tribe on Facebook. You'll find it on our page. You'll find it on Nick Rothwell's page, and you'll find it on the Retribe page. Since me and Nick were speaking last week, he was like, "Can you put something out on 4,000?" And then we did the podcast, and that player group grew 85 players overnight.
Yeah,
It went up 20%, like, and it's continued to grow and grow. As Nick said on the pod, there's 10,000 registered players in the UK. Let's get fucking 10,000 people on this page.
yeah,
Like, player power is a real thing. And not only that, like, I'm not going to go into player names, but on that group, it is just players. So some players are genuinely like putting videos out there that are they're tough watch. Some of them, they're leaving it out there. They're opening up. And that allows the rest of us to kind of follow suit, and it's okay. And if you want to be a part of a community like that, the Stick Together Tribe on Facebook, you'll find it on 4,000 Counting. Go, there's like two questions you have to do to join. I think it was, have you ever played and where do you play, or something like that. Fill them out. Nick's obviously the admin there. He'll let you in, and he's very welcoming. It is massively important, the mental health side of things. It's something we've touched on right the way back in episode 3 or 4. I think we had another form we had Cluzy and Nick Rothwell on, and we spoke about it early. It's something we're massively passionate about. I hope that any of you that are listening along, watching along, if you feel the need, the 4,000 DMs are open. Please do reach out. Victoria, the mental health side of it, obviously we've touched on it before. Concussions linked to mental health, concussions linked to CTE, all these things, that the connection pattern. How important is it we're addressing concussions properly and we're treating them properly so that we have less, I won't say no future issues, but we have less future issues with depression, with mental health, and with everything that can happen on the back of concussions.
Yeah, well, kind of before I kind of really address that, just to kind of reiterate what you've said about what Nick is doing with Hockey Sticks Together. And hockey, and we mentioned Erin already, we've mentioned the people who talk openly about things on that platform, people who come and talk on your platform. Hockey world is full of people who voluntarily spend a great deal of time trying to help other people. And that's a really, really positive sign. And it's good to see that. And it's easy to lose sight of that when people are frustrated about a single incident. But the reality is there's loads of good people doing really great things with hockey. Nick has done a lot of work with concussion as well. I know there's other people who are involved in Hockey Sticks Together who have got expertise in that area, who are looking to help. There's a lot of, like Erin, people who are involved in sort of being physios for the team, who are taking it upon themselves to learn more about concussion, to learn more about how they can protect players. And I think what's really changed is that among fans, partly because of things like, your podcast and others, there's so much more awareness that players just aren't these machines that we just pay to go and watch, and actually their lives are impacted by what they choose to do, whether paid or unpaid, when they're playing. So I think there's a whole lot of really interesting discussions about concussion that are coming forward. I think those are sometimes being led by other sports, like rugby's doing an amazing job with that. I mean, I'm really pleased to work with Progressive Rugby on that, and the players who are sort of filing lawsuits on that basis as well, and just offering the support. There's so much more awareness now that we have to consider how players feel and how they are and protect them. So I get called a killjoy all the time when I call for something that protects the players or something that does that, because there maintains this kind of idea that players are invincible. Yeah. And if they want, they can do what they want to do. But the reality is, what you then see 10 years later, or a week later in some circumstances, is somebody that's really come up against the consequences of what they've done. And they need support, not blaming, and certainly not any criticism for opening up about their mental health. I think it's the most important thing that we've done in the last 10 years through people like Nick, yourself, and a whole lot of others, is talk about that mental health problem, which can be worsened by things like concussion, things like drug, alcohol addiction, a whole range of things that can all be linked to things that happen when you play a very physical sport. So for me, the most important thing is player safety, and utmost in that is allowing players an opportunity to be able to get help they need when they want to talk about things.
Absolutely. The one that scares me is behavior change years later. Mm-hmm. I mean, I won't use me as an example because I was an angry little prick anyway. So it's not like I've grown up and got any. In fact, probably more chilled out than I was when I was a kid. But like the trials of Aaron Hernandez, I can't remember. It was on Netflix.
Yeah.
Like that guy's fucking brain was like mashed potatoes. There was no shock that his behavior went from here to like he wasn't the same human. Like there's no way, like when he was like the young fit athlete coming through with a fully functioning working brain, versus the man who did all these horrendous things. When you see his brain when he died, it's two different individuals, even though
Yeah,
they're sharing the same body. That's it.
yeah. And I think, we're only just learning about this stuff now. I mean, we've known about CTE for a long time, but it's only because of determined sort of scientists that have like faced kind of ridicule or lost their job or been hounded out of things, who actually come forward and said, look, this is a problem. And there was one on a podcast, the Diary of a CEO podcast, an interview with one of the leading scientists in CTE, talking about how she sees these brains sort of after death that are completely different because of the nature of repeated sort of head injuries, even non-concussive head injuries. And when
Oh,
a
interesting.
brain looks that different, like you definitely listen to it. It's well worth it. It was only last week, I think, that it was
I'll
released.
check it out.
Um, but yeah, I mean, these scientists, Bennett, and I'm terrible with surnames, but she, I've got their name somewhere. Who talk about this? The film Concussion that had Will Smith in. He played Bennett, and they're just hounded out of academia for saying these things, for confirming that there are these physical changes that happen to the brain, and that will lead to social changes. So it leads to things like um, mental health problems, low mood, depression. It leads to things like changing behavior, a difference in terms of understanding your emotions. People who choose to kind of react sort of angrily, people who don't feel they're in control of their emotional behavior, people who lose their ability to kind of rationalize and make those rash decisions, like alcoholism, addiction to gambling, addiction to drugs, addiction to sex, any of those things. I think Nick talked about this with you last week. Those things happen anyway in a culture, but when you're mixing in that brain injury as well, it can exacerbate those. And then that leads to these problems where players really, really struggle either during or after their playing days. And we talked about this a couple of years ago in relation to Andre Payet. And one of the things that I focus my academic work on is try instead of blaming individual people for things. I think we discussed the fact that you call them demons, and I'm like, well, we could call it brain injury, not a demon. Like,
Yeah, true. Yeah.
let's not give it a
Yeah.
demon. Let's not make out that it's your fault. This is something that happens, and like we should be addressing the game rather than blaming individual players for things that
Yeah.
happen.
It's funny though, if you ask us all, we would all probably say the same thing. We would all be like, yeah,
Yeah,
it's our demons. Like every single one of
yeah,
us. Because, kind of all self-deprecating and all up on our own shit that we would probably take it as it being our own demons. But you are right. If you've had head traumas, you've had multiple injuries to your brain, then behavior is going to change. Shout out our boy Pisey as well.
yeah.
Couple of years flown by. We miss him dearly. He's an absolute legend, and yeah, I just got a lot of love for his boy Ollie. Been chatting
Yeah.
to him a little bit. He's been telling me about his football and that. So he's been out in Canada and going to see his grandparents and stuff, see Andre's mum
Yeah.
and dad and that. So that's really good.
It's
Um,
amazing he's done that, and Gemma's doing really, really good work there in kind of raising awareness as well. And like,
he's a beast.
really, really inspiring that she's kind of taking on this kind of fight as well and trying to raise awareness in people and help people find change.
Yeah, she's a legend as well. A lot of love for Gemma as well. There's like you say, there's a lot of good people in this sport doing a lot of work for nothing. Um, and they don't necessarily have to be players. They don't have to be ex-players. There's people from all walks of life really, really like digging in and coming together to try and make this place better, this community better for us all. Um, I hope you keep doing what you're doing. Before I let you go, you got anything else to tell me? What else is any interesting tidbits or facts or
Oh,
what's happening with? I know you can't say what you're doing with work, but you're actually working with teams. Here's a question for you then.
mhm.
I I don't know the specific teams, but I could have a little guess in my head. Are you shocked or surprised that you're not seeing the phone buzzing from some of the elite league teams to be using your, not even necessarily elite league, NIHL, GB, England. We've touched on the kind of the elite levels of the sport in the UK. That your phone's not ringing to get your expertise.
Do you know, I kind of dismiss it sometimes as being this kind of presumption that because I'm a woman and I haven't played ice hockey at that level, that I don't know what I'm talking about, and that there's
That's
kind of a
probably why
voice
your
that,
brain still works, by the way, because you're a
yeah.
woman that hasn't played ice hockey. That's probably why your brain's actually legit and you're smart as shit.
But you know, if teams in higher leagues or the highest leagues are recognizing my expertise and inviting me to talk to the players and to talk to them about things, I would have liked to think that, given that I'm around hockey every single weekend,
Yeah.
that there would be more demand. And I've always said it out really clear, but I mean, I've never directly approached the league or the teams, but I made it out really, really clear on social media that anything that I want to see change in hockey, I'm not looking to make any money out of this. All the things that I do in an unpaid capacity, with the exception of the work I'm doing overseas at the moment, which is part of paid work, which is why I can't talk about it.
Yeah.
But you know, all my expertise I would offer entirely free. I'm happy to talk to any, and I do talk to a lot of individual players who approach me. So that's one thing that I feel like I'm really pleased I can make a difference there. But I'm also willing to talk to any team at any level. And there's so many things that I've kind of learned and observed over the years that would be beneficial, not just about concussion, also about hockey culture, also about resisting the kind of problems that we're seeing with Hockey Canada at the moment, with sort of sexual
Yeah.
assault cases and hypermasculinity and those kind of things. I could offer, but also in terms of like listening to people talking about how they
Just lost that.
feel about things, knowing that it, but I'm certainly would be very willing to talk to people about how they're feeling, or come and talk to their teams, give training, anything like that. So I hope people do reach out, because certainly the help is there and it's offered freely, and we'll see what happens with it. But you know, I can't push anybody, because if you don't want to listen, then you're not going to approach me. That's fine.
I can't push anybody, but I have had Sam Chima, Nick Rothwell, and yourself on back to back to back. So I can lay a fucking beacon out there. Like, I can't push you guys, but I can start looking at the people I've had on the last few weeks and start understanding what we're trying to do here. We're trying to put good information out. We're trying to get good people out. And I think whether it is the mental side of the game that you talk about, or whether it's the addiction and stuff that Nick's talking about and his retried program, and or you talk about Sam Chima and what he's doing with the on ice stuff. Like, if the people at the top are listening, we've got good people here. Like, we have good people that are willing to help. I know on the back of the last couple of podcasts, we've kind of made some connections, good connections between certain people, Nick Rothwell, which is good. And I like where that's going. And the same thing, like we had Plusy on with, who were talking about like mental health and stuff as well, but also about his roller rink. And then we get a little GB connection and talking going over there. This podcast has the power to bring a lot of good people together. So I would like to think the fact that you're on here and you're putting that information out there, that someone is going to hit you up. And I think the people that benefit are the players.
Yeah,
Like, so if you're an owner, what have you got to fucking lose?
yeah.
Like, she just said
And
she's not charging
yeah,
you 10 grand to be there. Like, she's gonna come and do these things. Your players will be the ones to benefit. And trust me, after listening to Victoria for an hour, players will go away happy, that they really will.
yeah. And I mean, I'm happy for players. My DMs have always been open for players who want to talk about things at any point. And I'm always happy. So, you know, just to remind people that even if their teams or their clubs or their leagues are not necessarily reaching out, doesn't mean that they can't. And hopefully I can be helpful. And if I can't be helpful, I often know somebody who can be, that I can point them in the right direction of.
Anything else from you today before we let you go? Anything that was on your brain?
No, it's just nice to finish on the positive note and acknowledge
Yeah,
that, you know, it's been a rough year. I mean, it's been a rough few years we've had in
yeah,
UK hockey. but I do see progress everywhere, and everywhere I look, I see people who are doing all they can to reach out and try and make positive changes. And I choose to focus on that rather than the negatives of people who just want to troll and cause trouble.
Let's leave it on that wicked positive then. Obviously, our thoughts are still with Adam and his family. I hope this thing hurries up for Matt and they get an outcome. If you've enjoyed this video, please do subscribe, stick around. We'll be bringing you even more content. Our next interview is with Ethan James, the Romford Raiders netminder. So we will see you guys for another episode very, very soon. Peace. Thank you, Victoria.
Thanks.